Great. Yeah, bad dads of the Bible. 8 mistakes every good dad can avoid. There's only 8, so it makes it easy. So if you read the book, you'll find out the 8. If you haven't read it, it's important that you do. So just make sure 8. You can avoid those. All right, good. Well, delighted to be with you today. Take this badge off, this sticker off here. And I appreciate the introduction. I'm going to spend some time with you today talking about the life issue a bit, with a particular focus on fatherhood to some degree. And I've been with CareNet for I guess 4 years now. This past October, and I spent about 12 years before that as president of an organization called National Fatherhood Initiative. Some of you may have heard of the organization. We're really focused on helping connect the hearts of fathers to their kids. And it's interesting because when I tell people that, a lot of times people are saying, like, gosh, from the fatherhood world to the pregnancy center world, there's a lot of men there, and if you've ever been to our conference, it's hard to find a men's room at our conference. It seems like it's like a career non sequitur, but it really isn't, because when I was a 20-year-old college student, I got my girlfriend, now wife, pregnant, and we had an unplanned pregnancy. I'm still trying to figure out how that happened, but I digress. And I remember when she went to student services and got the pregnancy test, and the nurse comes back and in sort of a matter-of-fact tone says, well, you're pregnant. And then she says almost immediately, now, of course, you're going to have an abortion. And she says, well, what year are you? And so my girlfriend at that time says, well, I'm a sophomore. And she says, oh, my gosh, a sophomore? How are you going to finish school with a baby? We were both at Princeton at the time, and it seems like it doesn't make a lot of sense. And she said, no, I want to have my baby. And then she says, well, what do you want to do when you graduate? And she says, well, I want to become a doctor. And she's like, well, graduate from Princeton with a baby and become a doctor with a baby. It doesn't seem like it makes a whole lot of sense. So I remember her coming back to the dorm and us sitting on the edge of the bed, which is obviously where we should have spent more time. I just try to keep it real. It's funny now, not so funny then, but yes, we were, and her telling me this story, and it's interesting because, my wife was certainly a bit shell-shocked. This nurse, she was an older woman, probably a mother herself. She could have said, okay, let's try to see how we can make your choice work. Let me see how I can help you. Or she could have asked, where's the father? Who's the father? Maybe we can have him come next time to prepare him to support your choice and his child. But she said none of that, some choice. So there we were on the edge of the bed, and I remember her telling me this. And it's interesting because I basically said to her in my 20-year-old way that, we're going to go forward with the plan. We're going to get married, be a husband to you and a father to our child growing inside of you, and that's what we did. So that's a picture of us, my 20-year-old self and my bride there. I'm still not sure where I'm looking, actually. I don't know. Some of you may have 20-year-olds, and sometimes you just look. I don't know where it was. It's interesting. So we've been married for 34, going on 35 years, which is kind of amazing. And it's interesting because, we had an unplanned pregnancy, but we didn't have a crisis pregnancy because we created a family. And, it's interesting that nurse was right about one thing, that Yvette didn't graduate with one child. She actually graduated with 2. There's my 2 boys there. We had our second right before she graduated. Jamin, the one that was in the womb that's now outside of the womb, still dresses like that. He's an older guy. It's cheap, it's efficient. He still does that. Yeah. And there she is carrying Jamin in the Justin, my youngest one, in the graduation piece. And we weren't trying to make news or anything. It's interesting. This photo got picked up by an AP photographer, went all over the country. This young lady graduating from Princeton with a baby strapped on. And we weren't trying to make a news or statement, but Justin, our youngest, needed to be fed, and I did not have what could feed him. So we strapped him on her. And that was just, again, efficiency. That's our thing there. Here she is graduating from medical school, getting her degree. Here she is delivering her first baby, not her own child, but someone else's, as a physician. And there are my 2 boys, Jamin and Justin, both married. There they are. And you know, when I see that picture, one of the things that it reminds me of, there's an old saying that anybody can count the number of apple seeds in an apple, but only God knows the number of apples in a single seed. You see, we don't know potential. It's not our realm to kind of get into that because it's dangerous for us. Because, as you know, we see but dimly. Right? I remember one time recently somebody had asked me, said, well, what were you thinking when you told your girlfriend, I'll be your husband, you're going to father our child and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting. I'd never been asked that question before, but the word that came to mind at that moment was the word certainty. Certainty. That's Jamin's ultrasound from all those years ago, certainty. And because I was certain of what was growing inside of her, that it was my child, and because I was certain about that, I was certain about what I needed to do. And it's really interesting because Planned Parenthood some years ago was running this web-based ad, and the focus of the ad was really, this whole thing is just complicated. The issue's complicated. It's just complicated unless you've walked in her pumps or shoes or whatever. You can't really. It's just complicated. And I noodled on that as I tend to do about these kinds of things, and I thought about the typical pregnancy test. And with a typical pregnancy test, my understanding is that there's a cup, and it has some stuff in it. And then there's a stick, right? And so what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take the stick and you're supposed to stick the stick into the cup with the stuff. So you take the stick, you put it in the cup with the stuff, and then you pull it out, and then you read it, and it says, it's complicated. So a cheaper brand we may get, It really doesn't say that, does it? It's kind of a black and white issue. It's really not all that complicated at all. And it's interesting, especially when you think about the issue from the perspective of the child. It's really not complicated. It's a pretty binary decision. Either the child gets life or the child does not. It's pretty much a black and white thing. Well, before I came to CareNet, God kind of put on my heart this whole situation with my wife, Yvette, and I, and he gave me an insight. As important as our unplanned pregnancy was, it actually was not the most important or well-known unplanned pregnancy even to me. You know which one was? Birth of Christ. And it's interesting because, I imagine that Mary felt all the same things, the same kinds of feelings that my wife felt. She had hopes and dreams and aspirations for her life that did not include a child at this time and in this way. And so when the news came, she was challenged with a decision, and she made a decision. She said, let it be unto me as you have said. And she chose life. And we love to tell the story of Mary in the pro-life movement, don't we? We try to encourage women to tap into their inner Mary and to ascribe to themselves the virtue of Mary and choose life. But you have to think about, what did God do to make sure that Mary's unplanned pregnancy was not a crisis pregnancy? Did he give her a microloan? A social worker? What did he do? No, he sent an angel to Joseph. And it's interesting because Joseph had the very same dilemma as any abortion-minded man. He had hopes and dreams and aspirations for his life that did not include a child at this time and in this way. And like a guy in that situation, he was going to what? He was going to put her away quietly. See, because you couldn't put the baby away, so you had to put the woman and the baby away. What does that sound like to you? But the angel came to him and compelled him. He said, no. I need you to do two things, Joseph. I need you to be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her. And guess what Joseph did? He said, let it be unto me as you have said, and he chose life too. And you see, when you think about this, it's really interesting. Because when the angel, when Mary rather was going to be at risk, and Jesus was going to be at risk because Herod wanted to kill all the babies. Who did the angel go to? Did it go to Mary? No, it went to Joseph. Told him to what? Provide and protect. So he's one man, two missions. Husband to her, father to the child growing inside of her. One man, two missions, provide and protect. And you have to ask yourself, well, why is this? Well, because when you think about it, you see the Holy Family was Holy Family. A father and mother united in Mary, loving a child and loving each other and loving God. And you have to say, well, why is this? Well, it's because God doesn't just want have children to have life. He wants them to have abundant life. And you have to ask yourself, what does abundant life look like to a baby? You see, a doctor can give a baby life. You know, there was the abortion doctor, Kermit Gosnell. You know, he delivered babies, right? He would sit them on a cold steel table to die. That's life. It's not abundant life. Or a doctor can deliver a baby and hand the baby to a single mom. Now, this absolutely is a life-affirming act. There's no question about that. But you got to really ask yourself, is this really God's design or God's desire or what he wants for mothers and children? See, I grew up in a single mother home. I know very well how challenging this can be for mothers and for children. Or the doctor can deliver this baby and hand it to a father and mother united in marriage, loving each other, loving their child, and ideally loving God. Now, we know that's abundant life. And how do we know that? Why? Because that's what happened with Jesus. You ever think about the fact that Jesus could have come into the world via a single mother? The scripture says Jesus would be born of a virgin, but it didn't say a married virgin. But God found this perfect structure. Joseph and Mary, right? This relationship that they were in, a covenant relationship. That's why he was going to divorce her quietly. They were in a covenant relationship, and he found this perfect relationship that accomplished his purpose without violating his principle. It's because God has a point of view. He has a design for how children should come into the world. And Jesus came into the world consistent with that design. He was given abundant life in humanity in terms of that structure and became abundant life for us all. And that's why I tell people, you know, especially now as we're ready to march, that I'm not pro-life, I'm pro-abundant life. Pro-abundant life. And I'm challenging and encouraging folks to be pro-abundant life. But you see, you can't be pro-abundant life without talking about fathers and without talking about marriage. And you know, it's interesting because people sometimes get it kind of twisted up. Well, and it's not just about whether that mother marries that guy. Even though we know the social science research says that's the best structure and everything, and we should certainly encourage that whenever we can. But see, what has happened, the reason why she's in this moment, in the crisis pregnancy center or in the abortion clinic, is because she's delinked fatherhood, motherhood, sex, and marriage. She's come from a culture that delinks fatherhood, motherhood, sex, and marriage. And she has ascribed those virtues to herself, and that's why she is where she is. And so the reality is that if she comes in and we love her up and she has her child and she goes back out into the culture with that same stuff delinked, guess what? She'll be back. I call it the 18 rule. We'll see her in 18 months with a new baby and a new guy, new crisis in air quotes. Or we'll see her daughter in 18 years, or a young lady that her son got pregnant in 18 years. See, that makes our work transactional, not transformational as God desire. Our sign shouldn't say, thank you, come again. That's Planned Parenthood sign. Their motto is consumer, ours is covenant. Their motto is retail, ours is relationship. But if we don't do things to talk about this issue rhetorically and to address the issue programmatically in a pro-abundant life way, then we end up in exactly the same place. Now, I started to think, well, why is it that in the pro-life movement we haven't necessarily been talking about this way? We don't link marriage and the abortion issue and fatherhood and all that kind of stuff. Why don't we do that? And you know, it's interesting because I started to think about this, and I said, you know, when the issue came into the public square in 1973, basically the pro-choice people brought it into the public square in sort of legislatively, certainly legally, and in a big way, and they basically defined the issue and said it's about a woman plus a question mark, and then they started to define the question mark. They said, well, first it's about the woman in product conception, it's about the woman in choice, now it's about the woman that's complicated, and if you tracked what was happening over the last year or so with Planned Parenthood, it's about the woman and it's for sale. See, it's very easy to think about what's in the womb as a product when all you think about it as a product of conception. And products can be for sale. So we shouldn't be shocked by that. It makes perfect sense if you have a retail model. in terms of the way you look at the issue. So they did that, and we responded and said, no, 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 it is about the baby. It's about the baby. It's about the baby. And then we started getting attacked by the other side. So you don't care about women. You just care about babies. You just care about saving babies. That's all you care about. We said, no, 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 no. We care about women and babies. Love them both, love them both, love them both. And this is basically where the issue sits today. This is basically where the issue sits. Now, I want to say to you and suggest to you, this is the wrong paradigm. I had a reporter once ask me, said, was CareNet more for the woman or more for the baby? I said, that's a great question. That's like asking me, am I more for breathing in or for breathing out? I mean, they're both essential to life. They're both an aspect of life. They're both necessary for life. I say I reject your entire paradigm. See, I reject the entire paradigm. See, because we shouldn't reject abortion for one reason. We actually should reject it for two. We shouldn't just object to abortion because it's an assault on the sanctity of life, but also because it's an assault on the sanctity of marriage and family as God designed. See, here's the thing. When abortion was legalized in 73, two things happened, and one thing that happened we never talked about, and it was this. The law delinked fatherhood and motherhood in the womb. Historically, men and women both became parents at the point of conception. It was linked together. And in God's economy, you're not a father unless you're a husband, and you're not a mother unless you're a wife. So it also delinked husbandhood and wifehood in the womb. So it delinked these things. And now, legally, men actually don't become fathers at conception. They become fathers at birth. And women become mothers at conception and have all the rights ascribed to them. That's an enormous change in the culture. I mean, enormous. And no one really talked about it. But it has rippled through the culture. You see, our God is a God of unity, and he united fatherhood and motherhood together in the womb. And the baby is a living reflection of this. And what God has joined together, no society should put asunder. Moreover, fatherhood is a more fragile cultural and social institution than motherhood. And now we've stripped it from its historical and God-given connection in the womb, and the effects have been profound. Now, some of you may be mothers in here. Any mothers in here? Claim your kids? There's a few of them. Right? Now, I want to take you back to that joyous, wonderful moment when you were giving birth. Travel back with me. That wonderful moment, you're giving birth. I have a question for you. At any point when you were giving birth, did you say, hey, listen.
I'm done.
I'm getting a latte. I'll be at Starbucks. Finish up. I'll be back. Anyone pull that off? It's incredibly difficult for mothers to leave their children during birth, after birth, and frankly, even with abortion. Now, if I ask fathers the same question, you see a woman walking down the street and she's pregnant. I mean, we can do some crazy stuff, and you point to her and you say, her stomach, you say, is that your baby? Now, I know we can do some crazy stuff, but 99.9% of course, it's biologically, physically of course it's my baby. But the guy walking next to her, if you ask that question, is that your baby? It's not a dumb question, necessary question, essential question. And as a society and a culture, you should have a point of view of what his answer should be. And if you don't, you sow the wind and reap a whirlwind of father absence. And that's exactly what's happened in our nation. So we de-link these things, and that's exactly what's happened. You see, we should object to abortion because we believe that children should have fathers and mothers from the point of conception on, just as God designed. If we had said that back in 1973, you could have heard a pin drop. Could have heard a pin drop in the culture. Say it today. Say it in church today. So those two things come together. And by the way, if you think about it, what is that story? That's the story of Mary and Joseph. What did the angel say to Joseph? Do not be afraid to take her as your what? Your baby mama, your boo, your wifey, your shorty what? Your wife. He affirmed first the sanctity of marriage and family as God designed. Then he told him who Jesus was and affirmed the sanctity of life. See what I'm saying? Create the basket before he put the baby in it. So we need to be talking about this issue the same way. Now, there's some other reasons for that, which I will go into. And the other thing I have to tell you is that we have to be careful that we don't fall into a trap, and it's a well-placed one trap, when we say that this is, quote, solely a woman's issue. You know, the pro-choice side reminds us constantly with the mantra, her body, her choice. And although we don't say it in those terms, honestly, I've seen similar sentiments in the pro-life movement. I'm just saying. Similar sentiments. Because if you think about it, right? If you think about it, we're actually in agreement with the pro-choice folks when we talk about it in those terms. We're just arguing about whether the baby is a question mark or not. We're actually in agreement. And one of the things that's really clear is that both of those perspectives actually exclude fathers and men, which means you won't ever have a conversation and discussion about marriage. Because it's a paradigm that's not designed to include marriage. But the example of Jesus' birth declares loudly, yes, it's about the baby, but it's also about marriage, motherhood, fatherhood, and the family, and God's design for those sacred institutions. And you also think about it, if it's framed this way, you know, as woman, question mark, woman, who benefits from that? I mean, who needs men anyway? Don't answer that. But think about it. If the other side prevails, there's no baby. And if we need the guy, we need him just to pay for the abortion. And now that we build abortion into health care, we don't even need him for that. But on our side, if we prevail, there's a baby. And at a minimum, we want the guy to pay for the baby. And certainly from a Christian societal perspective, we want him to do much, much more than that. And certainly if we have a child-centered perspective, we want him to do much, much more than that. So actually, by framing it this way, we actually hurt ourselves. We're in a boxing match with a person who's cut off one arm, and we tie one arm behind our back just to make it fair. You know, I love Frederica Matthews Green. Some of you may have heard of her, read some of her stuff. She's just amazing. She wrote this one book called Real Choices, Listening to Women Looking for Alternatives to Abortion. Here's a passage from that. I just love it. It says, providing a substitute for the father in pregnancy and child rearing is like providing a substitute hand. A dexterous, lightweight prosthesis with some grasping ability is better than nothing, better than a hook, better than last year's model of prosthesis. But the most advanced artificial hand that researchers can dream of will always be blunt and clumsy compared to the flexibility, warmth, and sensitivity of the original. It's better not to lose the hand. It's better not to lose the man. And so in the work I do, you know, one of the things we're trying to make sure never happens is that pregnancy centers or anybody else tries to become artificial husbands and artificial fathers for the women and the children because they need real ones. Now, there's another reason that we really have to talk about this because, you know, we actually surveyed women and we asked them questions about abortion. This is a national survey that we did with Lifeway about women who had had abortions. And we asked the question about, who did you talk to about your decision to abort? And what you can see on the chart here, if you can, I'll just say, far and away it was the father of the child. Far and away, more than a medical professional, abortion provider, girlfriend, best friend, mama, anybody. It was the father of the child. And then we asked the question, who was the most influential in your decision to abort? And guess who was number one again? The father. Now think about what we've been doing for 40 years around this issue. I'm just keeping it real. Think about how the pregnancy center model has been programmed and built. I'm a business guy by training. If you told me, Joe over there in the corner is the guy I talk to all the time before I decide to do business with anybody, and he's the most influential in terms of my decision to do business with anybody, what do you think I would do? What would you do? I'd try to get you to introduce me to Joe. Is that what we're doing? No. No. That's not what we're doing. The other reason is when you think about the support that mothers and children need, and that's what this slide talks about, support needed by mothers and children, right? Over time, they need physical, emotional, spiritual, and social support. You think about Jesus, how he engaged the woman at the well, like what he did. He engaged her physically, emotionally, spiritually, and socially, right? He connected all those kinds of support that mothers and children need. This chart basically says that support increases over time, okay? Now, God is wise. He actually has a support mechanism to make sure that mothers and children get the support they need over time. It's called husbands and fathers. Husband for her and a father for the child growing inside of her. Now, pregnancy centers. You see that little teal in the corner there? Amazing work pregnancy centers do. Amazing work. Necessary work. Love, 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 love it. L-O-V-E, it. Exclamation point. Incredibly necessary. But it's from conception to birth and maybe a little bit further. There's a problem. See that blue? That's called missing support. See, to a degree that a woman cannot figure out how she's going to do that, she's much more likely to have an abortion. So we're loving her up, telling her all the support she has from conception to birth, and maybe a little bit further. The other side, I call that Planned Parenthood and the abortion provider's playpen. While we're reminding her of the support she has from conception to birth, they're reminding her of the support she doesn't have from 1 second after birth on. And to the degree a woman can't figure that out, she's much more likely to have an abortion. It's just business. That's the reality. That is the abortion problem. That's the abortion problem. See, that's what the nurse was talking to my wife about. That's where her hopes and dreams and aspirations for her life fit. Now, 86% of the women that have abortions are unmarried. So why would you de-link the abortion issue from the marriage issue? The abortion issue is a marriage issue. I have 9 minutes. Sorry, that's my timer. I'll be done. Don't worry. I'm moving. Right? It's a marriage issue. And it's also a church issue. See, we need to rethink what we're doing. We need to be rethinking how the church is engaging on this issue. And there's a number of reasons for that. One, 54% of the women that have abortions profess to be either Catholic or Protestant. 54%. Now let's do some math. 1 million abortions, that's 540,000 abortions from people who profess to be either Catholic or Protestant. Well, let me give you another stat. We did the same survey. We asked these women who had had abortions about church attendance. And what we found was that 4 out of 10 women who had had abortions were actually attending church at least monthly, and most more than monthly, at the time of their first abortion. Attending church monthly or more than monthly is actually what we call Christians. Do the math. 1 million times 40% is 400,000. The average abortion is $500. 400,000 times 500 is $200 million that Christians are funding the abortion industry year after year after year after year after year. I could say it 40 times. We're marching here, marching there, trying to defund Planned Parenthood. Look, we need to overturn Roe v. Wade in our own churches and in our own pews. We don't need a president or a congressman or Supreme. We can do it ourselves. You think if the church started pulling $200 million of abortion money away from Planned Parenthood and started putting that money towards that missing support area, you think it'd have an impact? Why do you think that they don't listen? They see the same data I look at. We can send all the folk in there, people like me, to talk to whomever. But they know, look, your folk, when their daughter goes to college and gets pregnant by the wrong guy, you want abortion safe, legal, and plentiful. Your people do. This is the log in our eye versus the speck in the culture's eye. And lest you feel I'm being too harsh or too hard on women in this regard, it really has a lot to do with what we've done. I mean, the reality is that if a woman wakes up Sunday morning, takes a pregnancy test, and it's a blue plus, and it's not good news, exactly who should she talk to in the church? Who's the on-ramp? Who? I mean, the reality is there isn't one. There's no ministry on-ramp for you if you're that way. Your husband left you, maybe. Got financial problems? Sure. Got a porn problem? Sure. But if you wake up with a blue plus and it's not good news, there's not a ministry on-ramp in the church for you. And the reality that we know is that it's 9 days from the time the woman confirms her pregnancy to the time she schedules her appointment. There's only one Sunday in there. So she's got to know when she sees that blue plus that my church is a church that's going to treat me with compassion, hope, and help. That my church is not going to try to treat me the way that the Pharisees wanted to treat the woman caught in adultery, but going to treat me the way that Jesus treated her. Neither do I condemn you, but go and sin no more. And this is the low-hanging fruit. We're trying to talk to the woman with the shirt. I had an abortion. It was wonderful. What about the woman in the back of the church that knows that it's a violation of her values, but feels as a result of because of the circumstances surrounding this, that she has no choice? And then the abortion provider looks like a compassionate alternative. The other reason is that when you think about this, the church has a very, very specific call to this issue, which is connected to fathers. Again, what? James 1:27, religion that God our Father finds as pure and faultless is this, what? That we care for the orphans and the widows in their distress. And God gave me this insight. What was an orphan and what was a widow when this was written? Well, an orphan was a child without a father, and a widow was actually a mother without a husband. Now, if you're interested in religion that's pure and faultless in God's sight, like he said, now let's do some inventory today with you. What'd you do that was pure and faultless in my sight? See, the difference is back then the husband and the father was dead. Today, the husband and the father, air quotes, says to the mother and the child, you're dead to me. But the power of the church has the ability to reach these cultural orphans and widows at their point of need, but it also has that Lazarus power to bring that culturally dead father back to life. John talked about where we have a ministry of what? Reconciliation. And nowhere is it more needed. So in the pregnancy centers, we actually have cultural orphans and widows. Your cultural orphans and widows that you, as members of the body of Christ, have a call to, if you believe what James 1:27 says. And the other thing, part of this has to do with like even looking at how we view ourselves. Now, some of you have probably been to a wedding. Anybody willing to claim their wedding or anything like that? Right, well, one guy back here. All right. You ever been to a wedding? Right, the music's playing. The groom's there, groomsmen there, bridesmaids are there, no bride. Music's playing, sister's just cranking. Not coming. Do you say to the maid of honor, listen, step in, we need to keep this thing moving. Food's gonna get cold. You end up like Jacob, right? He's the married, jacked up, married the wrong woman. We don't do that. Well, that's actually what's happened on the life issue. See, there's been a frustration that the church is the bride of Christ. And because the church has not stepped into the role, and specifically because pastors have not taken the leadership on this role, and have allowed the culture to frame this as a political issue, as opposed to a ministry issue, which it is and has always been, folk got frustrated and tried to step in to be the bride. But there's only one bride. It's the church. And us as members of the church. We're a para-church ministry. Right? What does para mean? It means you come alongside the church. See, who owns the client? The lawyer or the paralegal? The lawyer. The paralegal has a very specific set of skills for a very specific limited time frame. But the client belongs to the lawyer. The folks in the pregnancy centers belong to the church. Now, we got to get them there. It's interesting. Dr. Tony Evans, who's I'm a big fan of, says, when the church fails to act in concert with God's prescribed agenda, God often chooses to postpone his active involvement until his people are prepared to respond. We say we're waiting on God. God's waiting on us. And it's been waiting on us. I love to say, life decisions need life support. Pregnancy centers do an amazing, amazing job. They're like these speedboats. Get into these areas, boom. See someone in the water, love them up, dry them off, right? Put them on the boat. Oh, another one. Love them up, dry them off, put them on the boat, love them up, dry them off. What happens over time? Boat's full. Too many people on the boat. So what do? Put them back in the water. Who can swim? Should you be surprised if you got to pick them up again? See, but the church The church and the role that we have is like this SS Compassion, this big boat. See, what's supposed to happen is that little boat's supposed to connect to the big boat, and then we're supposed to get off the little boat and get on the big boat. Because that's where all the life support is. So all those little rings you see, those are the reasons why women have abortions and why men support them. And folks in church have these buoys sitting in their laps, these little life supports sitting in their laps. And the objective is to get you to throw that in terms of support, to walk alongside someone in terms of support, so they won't be drowned by the circumstances of life. Everybody in the church has a life ring that can address this issue. And that's one of the reasons why CareNet recently developed a resource called Making Life Disciples. It's a curricula designed for the church, for small groups in the church, to put a pregnancy care ministry in the church. Not center, ministry, the ministry component of a pregnancy center in the church. So that folk within the church are trained to receive folks from pregnancy centers, to give them ongoing support and discipleship. And also, so they're trained for folks who are in the church who are at risk for abortion. So we can offer compassion, hope, help, and discipleship for anyone who's considering abortion. It's ministry. See, if you've been thinking about the life issue, here's the thing I figured out, as I kind of close up here. Most people look at the life issue through a social services lens. So you see a woman, she's pregnant, you say, well, what can we do? You know, whatever. It's social services. And then we start approaching pastors with a social services pitch. But I want to challenge you to change how you're thinking about this. You need to be looking at the life issue through the lens of discipleship, the same way we do about other Christian acts of service. Water for the thirsty, food for the hungry, clothes for the naked. This is compassion for the pregnant. Those things are on-ramps to what? Discipleship. This is an on-ramp to discipleship. So when you see that woman, you say, oh my gosh, she needs to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. The guy who got her pregnant needs to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. The child growing inside of her needs to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. See, and when you think about it that way, you get the social services piece. Because you can't be a good disciple without meeting physical needs. But you can meet physical needs without being a good disciple. So you need to reframe the whole issue in your head. This is about discipleship, which means it's what? Ministry. Not politics, ministry. It's in the church. It is a ministry of the church to offer compassion, hope, and help, and discipleship to anyone who's considering abortion. Does that make sense? So I encourage you to make Making Life Disciples yours. Because our call is what? To the Great Commission. And pregnancy centers can only do conversion, right? They do evangelism, which leads to conversion. But once that person is converted, then what happens? Well, we're sending them back out to the culture. And everybody is a disciple of something or somebody. So they came to the pregnancy center as a disciple of the culture. We send them back out as a disciple of the culture. And discipleship is not just a Christian construct. It's a principle of replication. If you're a parent, your children are your disciples. If you're a gang leader, your gang members are your disciples. She's a disciple. He's a disciple of the culture. And what does it do? Replicate. In other words, we see them back again. They're not transformed. It's a transaction. But the church has this very specific opportunity, need, and specific ability for ongoing support and discipleship. And that's what has to happen. Now, let me just close it with a quick story. When I first started doing this work, I had an opportunity to talk to a young lady who I've known for many, many years, very close to my family. And we were talking about Planned Parenthood and kind of what happens there. I was very early on when I started with CareNet. And we're talking about what Planned Parenthood does and everything. She's incredibly knowledgeable. I was just like, wow, how do you know so much about what they do? And she kind of got real quiet, and she kind of looked at me and said, when I was 19, I had an abortion. She's now 25. And then she got real silent. And then she burst into tears. She hadn't told anybody about this. Why she chose me? Well, I'm the president of CareNet. No. I don't know why she chose me. I know what to do. I just hugged her. And I tell you this, as she sobbed, I've never hugged anyone as long as I hugged this young lady. I'm not saying that for a fact, it's true. I just hugged her and hugged her and hugged. She's just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And as she finished and was drying her tears, she looked up into my eyes and she said, I guess this is what it would have been like if I had had a father, huh? You see, her father left when she's about 6 years old. She hadn't seen him in years. I tell people all the time, the kids have a hole in their soul in the shape of their dad. That God whispers into the wombs of their mothers that there is this one who should love you like no other. And when that father is unable or unwilling to fill that hole, it can leave a wound that's not easily healed. And I know that because I'm a wounded soul. But it's interesting, you see, she said more than even she knew she said. Because not only did she not have a father for her, but she also didn't have a father for her child and a husband for her. She didn't have someone who spoke like Joseph and said, I'll be a husband to you and a father to that child growing inside of you. And the reality is we have a hole in our care net. Because we have to be reaching not only women, to challenge them, to encourage them, to ascribe the virtue of Mary to the life growing, to themselves, to protect the life growing inside. We also need to be challenging, calling to men and missioning men to ascribe the character of Joseph, to be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her. Amen? Amen. And scene. I'm done. Great. Now, I probably used up some of my question and answer time, or I may have none.
Yep, we have question and answer time.
Okay.
You're good to, how much, we're at 10:30? Oh my goodness, Roland, you used up your Q&A.
Bam! Done.
How about one question? Do we have time for one question? Right here.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the statistics in terms of ethnicities? How does this break down ethnicity?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the
Economics.
I don't have the specific numbers off the top of my head, but essentially, the African American community is roughly 25 to 30% of the abortion, about 12% of the population. Hispanic community is 20 to 25%, and then the other is white. So there's the African American community far and away has a higher abortion rate. Same with the economics. I mean, those things kind of track the same way as well. I mean, when you think about the issue, certainly from the perspective of that I'm talking about here, missing support. Well, who's more likely to have the missing support, right? And also, when you think about the issue from the perspective of marriage, what's the marriage rate, right? 1 out of 3 black kids are growing up in a home with their married biological parents, which means the abortion rate is higher in that community as opposed to the white community, the Hispanic community or Asian community. So it really is a marriage issue in a big way, and we need to be relinking those things together in terms of our response and casting that vision for folks to break the cycle. So I think that's it. Somebody had a question back there. You want me to take another one?
Well, let me ask a question, because
Sure.
I think this is something that everybody's mind. How can a church filled with white folks reach into, or reach out to the families, the mothers that are in need of church, that are in the African-American communities? How do we do that cross-cultural thing that isn't necessarily natural?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, frankly, it's one of the reasons why we developed Making Life Disciples, because when you start talking about this issue in the context of ministry, it breaks down the barriers. See, in the African American community, the life issue is so connected to politics because abortion is so connected to the Democratic Party, and African Americans are so connected to the Democratic Party. Therefore, this is not our issue because it's not our politics. Now, you don't have to, you may not agree with that, but you need to understand that. So as soon as you start talking about the issue, then people start viewing it through the lens of advocacy, which makes it politics, which a lot of times will shut down the conversation. But when you frame the issue from the perspective of discipleship, now that's common ground. So you can talk to a black pastor, and frankly, even a black pastor who might be pro-choice. I mean, take a little second here. Let me explain this to you, right? If you're pro-choice, what does that mean? It basically means that you have a circle with a line through it that says that there are basically two choices, either birth or abortion. I think that both of those choices are morally neutral and equally fine. I don't care which one she chooses as long as she has the right to choose it. Make sense? That's what it means to be pro-choice. That's what it should mean, right? Now, your circle, which is a pro-life circle, just has one word in it, birth. So think about it as a Venn diagram. I got one circle with a line through it, I got birth on one side, and I got abortion on the other side. Your circle only has birth. Now, if somebody's truly pro-choice, what does that mean? Once a woman decides that she wants to bring her child into the world, and there are obstacles to her bringing the child into the world, if you're pro-choice, you should be wanting to remove those obstacles. Because on the abortion side, if there are obstacles to her having an abortion, you're wanting to remove those obstacles. Parental notification, anything, stigma, whatever it is. So you should actually have the same view on the life side, removing obstacles. So what business are we in? We're in the business of removing obstacles for folks who choose to bring their children into the world. Now, you may not like that I want her to choose to bring it in, but once she makes that decision, you need to flip your jersey, because we're actually on the same team. And that Venn diagram comes together. So the common ground on this, in the black church, black community, wherever it is, the on-ramp is saying, listen, we may not agree with the notion of whether she should have the right or not. But I hope we can agree that once she chooses to bring her child into the world, that we should together support that perspective from conception to birth and remove obstacles for her. So you have women in your congregation who have obstacles. We're bringing their children into the world who have obstacles. That's common ground for us. That's ministry. When you start talking to black folk like that, it totally changes the dynamic, and it moves it out of the world of advocacy into the world of care. And it creates common ground. And what I do with folks, as I draw out for them that circle, and basically I tell pro-choice people, I said, my issue, look, I kind of zig when they zag. I say, my big issue is that you're actually not living out your pro-choice mentality and worldview. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, what are you doing for women who are facing obstacles and choose to bring their children into the world and are facing obstacles? Tell me what you do. I know what you're doing for women who want to have abortions and they're facing obstacles. Well, what are you doing for women who choose to bring their children into the world? I'm not doing anything. Well, then guess what? That's the world I'm in. And as you start to talk to people that way, again, it moves it out of advocacy, which is where all the politics is, and it moves it into the side of ministry. And I think that when you think about it that way and talk about it that way, that creates an on-ramp. That creates an on-ramp for you to have conversations, certainly African Community and other communities as well. Does that make sense? Make sense?
That's exactly what I was asking.
Okay,
Perfect.
great.
Thank you, Roland.